heel prettig, hebben we allemaal ambiance. Dit is belangrijk. Ja, ze wisten het, dan moesten stoppen. Simultane vertaling op het rechtskanaal, ja.
ahead.
Where Emily is with a beret.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's midnight. Yes. Go to the same place. Here.
Ma palun korra tähelepanu, meil läheb umbes 10 minutit veel. There's gonna be another 10 minutes. Sorry.
Good afternoon, everybody. As you can see, great to be back in Tapa. Third time. Oh, sorry. It gives my absolutely. You can't keep me away. There we go.
And here too?
Yep. How's everybody behaving? Very well. Fantastic. Fantastic.
They need a speech from me.
Come on. Okay. Very right. Here we go.
Prime Minister, you're supposed to say Prime Minister?
That's.
Hello, dear guests, distinguished ladies and gentlemen of the press. We are very happy to welcome the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and the Secretary General of NATO here in Estonia in Tapa base. The Prime Minister of Estonia, Kaja Kallas, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson, and the Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, will deliver statements and take few questions. The press conference is held in English. First, Prime Minister Kaja Kallas, please.
Dear Jens, dear Boris, dear members of the press, this is quite an exercise, and it shows how NATO and allies work together, even making such visits happen. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you both in Estonia. I wish it could be under more pleasant circumstances. We are here because the security of Europe has changed dramatically. After a long and aggressive lead-up in Georgia, Crimea, Donbas, last week all the masks came off, and the whole world can now see Putin has gone from an autocrat to an outright aggressor, and Russia from a difficult neighbor to a rogue state. Putin has unleashed 200,000 soldiers against a free and sovereign country. Their targets: hospitals, schools, kindergartens, innocent Ukrainian lives. And we, unfortunately, expect to witness even more horrors, including indiscriminate bombings. We mourn all the lives lost in Putin's war. We are also seeing dangerous neglect of nuclear safety by Russian troops. We have just learned Lukashenko's troops have also entered Ukraine. There is no doubt Belarus is a co-aggressor in this conflict. The whole international community must now stand up against the evil. Allies have been united against the aggression since the very beginning, and I'm very glad to say that. We have witnessed a fundamental change of policies across the democratic world, all in support of Ukraine and aimed in isolating the aggressor. Some of them seemed even unthinkable a few days ago. NATO needs a forward defense strategy. NATO should be prepared to defend the most vulnerable part of NATO, which is the Baltic countries. And this includes, on land, establishing permanent increased forward presence, in air, establishing a credible defense posture, and a sense of urgency in developing NATO's upgraded defense plan. At the same time, we need to continue our urgent support to Ukraine. Military aid is critical here. Estonia will continue with support as we provide significant military, financial, and humanitarian aid. We cannot stop until we have stopped Putin. This is what we simply must do for ending the brutal violence and destruction and for helping the brave people of Ukraine. And Ukraine should be given a very clear signal to join the EU. The security of Ukraine is the security of Europe. Although there is no direct military threat at our borders, NATO must take a leap now and adopt rapidly to the new security situation. We must move from forward presence to forward defense and from air policing to air defense. I welcome the decisions already taken to strengthen the defense here. We are today in Tapa, where we can witness the real collective efforts and commitment of NATO. I would like to thank the United Kingdom and all the allies who are already present here in Estonia and also sending additional troops to Baltic region. We must work together to help Ukraine and to strengthen our own defense. Thank you.
Thank you. Prime Minister Boris Johnson, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Kaja. Thank you for your welcome. Great to see you, Jens, and great to be here again in Tapa, this very, very important mission. NATO is perhaps unique in the history of defensive alliances because it has stood for over 70 years, not for aggression, but for peace and stability. And during those years, the alliance has been tested many times in the Cold War, in the Balkans, in Afghanistan. This matters because the world has become a more dangerous and a more contested place. A few short days ago, we all stood witness to scenes we hoped we would never see again on the continent of Europe. A sovereign, democratic people fighting for their lives against a foe who wishes to subjugate them by force. As we realize the terrible extent of President Putin's ambitions, the world has been rightly united in praise for the valor and bravery of the Ukrainian people, led by President Volodymyr Zelensky. And I expect, like colleagues here, I've had the privilege of speaking to President Zelensky virtually every day since the Russian invasion, and I've heard firsthand his sheer determination that the freedom his people have experienced must never be snatched away. And indeed, it's clearer day by day from the way the Ukrainians are responding that President Putin has made a disastrous miscalculation. His troops have not been welcomed into Ukraine as he prophesied, and instead the Ukrainians have mounted an astonishing and tenacious resistance. We, as the international community, have a responsibility to do everything we can to help the Ukrainians in their efforts. And that's why the UK has trained 22,000 members of the Ukrainian armed forces and why we've provided further defensive military support to Ukraine. And we have a responsibility to all Ukrainians. That's why the UK has provided £140 million in humanitarian aid to Ukraine and to the region. It's why we've deployed both humanitarian experts and hundreds of military logistics experts to Ukraine's neighbours to help them shelter those seeking sanctuary on their shores. And it's why we've announced the first phase of a bespoke humanitarian route for the people of Ukraine to come to the UK. It's also why, alongside allies across the world, the UK has swiftly executed the biggest package of sanctions ever imposed against a G20 nation. And we've seen organisations from banks to oil companies to football leagues to singing competitions who've made it clear that Vladimir Putin must be, and his regime must be isolated from the international community for his actions. As we support the people of Ukraine, we must also shore up our shared resilience, both to protect our people and our values. These are nothing more than defensive measures, which have been the essence of NATO for more than 70 years. And I want to be crystal clear, finally, on that point. We will not fight Russian forces in Ukraine, and our reinforcements, like these reinforcements here in Tapa, are firmly within the borders of NATO members, and they are profoundly the right thing to do. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Secretary General Stoltenberg, please.
Prime Minister Kallas, Prime Minister Johnson, dear Kaja and dear Boris, it's great to be with you here at Tapa. It's great to be back, and we are here to meet the soldiers that are defending Estonia, our alliance and our values. These soldiers are keeping our nation safe and free, and we owe them a debt of gratitude. Thank you to Estonia for hosting our battle group so well and being such a staunch NATO ally. And let me also thank the United Kingdom and you, Boris, for leading this NATO multinational battle group here at the Tapa base in Estonia, and for doing so for the last 5 years. And also for doubling your contribution over the last few weeks with more British troops coming to Estonia. This really makes a huge difference and demonstrates NATO solidarity. We stand together in this time of crisis. The people of Ukraine are fighting bravely against the brutal and unprovoked Russian invasion. We utterly condemn the Kremlin's war. Allies are imposing severe costs on Russia through sanctions. We are increasing NATO presence across the alliance to deter and to defend. And we are stepping up our support to help Ukraine defend itself. NATO allies are sending Ukraine anti-tank weapons, air defense missiles and ammunition. Allies are also providing millions of euros worth of financial help and humanitarian aid. I commend Estonia and the United Kingdom for the assistance you are providing to Ukraine. Over the last weeks, in response to Russia's attack on Ukraine, we have increased our defensive presence in the air, on land and at sea, with over 100 jets at high alert operating from 30 different locations, and over 120 ships from the Baltic Sea to the Mediterranean. The UK, the US and other allies are deploying thousands more troops to the eastern part of the alliance. For the first time in our history, we are deploying the NATO response force. Because there must be no doubt, no room for miscalculation or misunderstanding. Our commitment to Article 5 of the Washington Treaty is ironclad. We will protect and defend every inch of NATO territory. Credible deterrence prevents conflict and preserves peace. NATO is a defensive alliance. We do not seek conflict with Russia. Our message to President Putin is: stop the war, pull out all your forces from Ukraine, and engage in good faith in diplomatic efforts. The world stands with Ukraine in calling for peace. So, Kaja and Boris, it's great to be with you here again, and we stand together in the alliance, united in our condemnation of the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Thank you. We are now at your disposal for questions. Please state your name and media organization you are representing and to whom the question is addressed to. Please use microphone. My colleague will assist.
Hello, I am Katrin Aarma from Estonian television. I have a question to Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Your country has supported volunteers who are ready to fight on the ground in Ukraine. What do you think, under which circumstances should NATO get directly involved in fighting in Ukraine?
Well, thank you very much. And look, I'm going to be very clear about this because you're not quite right in what you say about supporting volunteers going to fight on the ground. The UK is not actively doing such a thing. But I understand, of course, the feelings of people who feel emotionally engaged in this conflict, because I cannot think of a time in international affairs when the difference between right and wrong, between good and bad, between good and evil has been so obvious. And it is clear that the people of Ukraine have right on their side, and I can understand why people feel as they do. But we have laws in our country about international conflicts and how they must be conducted. And on your point, as both Kaja and Jens have stressed, NATO is a defensive alliance. I think for any NATO member to get involved actively in conflict with Russia is a is a huge step which is not being contemplated by any member, and you would have to go to parliaments and to peoples to get agreement for such a step. That is not on the agenda. What is on the agenda is offering the humanitarian support that we are offering, the logistical, the defensive but lethal military support that we are, and we're offering it in ever-growing quantities, but also the economic pressure that the West is now applying to the Putin regime. And I think one thing is clear. Vladimir Putin miscalculated two things. He miscalculated the strength of the Ukrainian resistance, and he also miscalculated and underestimated the strength of Western unity and Western resolve to ensure that Putin must fail.
Thank you.
Thank you. Raghi Omar on behalf of all British broadcasters. There's a question to all three of you, actually. Kharkiv city is under heavy bombardment. The capital, Kiev, is being surrounded and has a column of heavy armor stretching somewhere between 25 and 30 miles towards it. Do you think that given the tactics being deployed by Russian forces edging towards indiscriminate use of munitions in civilian areas means that, given Russia's overwhelming superiority, that cities in Ukraine, including the capital, will inevitably fall? And then one specific one for you, Prime Minister Johnson. The UN Security Council is at the heart of the system of global peace and security. Britain, like Russia, is a permanent member. Do you think that you would support moves to suspend Russia from the UN Security Council?
Okay, start. Yes, what we are seeing in Ukraine is really very horrifying to see what kind of steps they are taking and how they are, escalating this crisis. The question whether the cities will fall, I think we underestimate the Ukrainians' motivation and will to protect their cities. Of course, we also know that the forces are not really equal. So one is to really conquer the cities, and the other one is to keep those cities under control. So I think there's going to be a lot of resistance from Ukrainians, and this, even if temporarily Russia takes hold of the cities, it's still very hard to keep. And as there is no support from the Ukrainian side. So I think what we have seen, and all Ukrainians have really surprised everybody, is by their motivation to fight for their country, to fight for their freedom. I think the same would be here, because we have already lost our freedom once, and we don't want to lose it second time. So I think all the nation is up to defend their country, and and to take it back even after, building the resistance in the nation, really, to take those back.
Yes, and just Raggy, on your point about what's happening in Kharkiv, it's absolutely sickening. And if it reminds me, if anything, if you remember the shelling of Sarajevo market by the Serbs, the shelling of innocent people in Bosnia, it has that feel to me of an atrocity committed deliberately against a civilian centre. And I think that coming to your second point, within the UN structures, it's very difficult to move people without a vote, and clearly where you have a majority, where you have a veto in the Security Council, you can't. There's a paradox. We can't vote to change the rules without the agreement of the Russians. But what is happening is that I think that the great middle of the UN congregation, if you like, is starting to realise quite how horrific this is. And with every day that goes by, as they watch the heroism of the Ukrainian resistance, and they see what's happening in Ukraine, and they see episodes like the shelling, like the missile in Kharkiv and the destruction of civilian populations, I think people's stomachs are being turned by what's happening. And they're seeing that it is necessary to stand up against Russian aggression, to support the Ukrainians, and to endorse our strategy, which is that President Putin must not be allowed to succeed. He must fail in Ukraine.
So what we now see is a new wave of attack against Ukraine, against innocent people, and a column of heavy Russian armor which is moving towards Kiev will bring more death, more suffering, and more civilian casualties. And that's the reason why we need to continue to provide support to Ukraine, why we continue to call on Russia to stop this bloody war, and why we need to impose costs by the heavy sanctions on Russia. And why we also should once again commend the bravery and the courage of the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian armed forces, and also the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. This is horrifying, this is totally unacceptable, and it's a blatant violation of international law.
Thank you.
Alexander Bilak, Delphi News. Question to Boris Johnson. By the middle of March, the UK will have sent here about 2,000 troops. That's definitely a big support for us. But what would happen? What would have to happen, or what would be the trigger point for you to double it or triple it, or what's the limit?
Well, thank you very much. We're very proud to be working here with our friends, with our French friends, with our Danish friends, and of course with our wonderful Estonian hosts. And I'm delighted that we're doubling it. It's a big commitment that we're making. I think that we'll always keep things under review. But what you can take it from me that our priority is the safety, the security of our friends and partners across the whole of the eastern frontier of NATO. And we're increasing our presence not just in Estonia, but in Poland, in the skies above Romania, in the eastern Mediterranean, in the Black Sea. The UK is beefing up our presence on NATO's eastern flank. And the message we need to get over, and I think we are collectively, all of us, is that if Vladimir Putin thinks he's going to push NATO back by what he's doing, he's gravely mistaken. This will end up with a fortified and strengthened NATO on his western flank. He'll have more NATO, not less NATO.
Thank you. Unfortunately, this is all the time we had. Thank you everyone for coming.
Danish television. I go on. Something tells me you'll have a brilliant question.
Yes,
Go on.
of course I will. You've doubled your number of troops here at the base in Tapa. Denmark is due to arrive next week.
Yes.
Would you like to see Denmark increase the number of troops here as well?
All I can say is that I had a great conversation with Mette, with your Prime Minister, the other day. She was fantastically robust. I think she understands the problem very well. I'm glad that Denmark is increasing its contribution. We work well with our Danish friends, and of course it's always good that Denmark is contributing more. But I hesitate to go beyond that. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Based on the questions that you got, based on the questions, Marika Walsh with the Globe and Mail, this morning you got some tough questions from a Ukrainian reporter. And today, this afternoon, you're telling the crowd here, we as the international community have responsibility to do everything we can to help the Ukrainians in their efforts. So are you actually doing that if you are not granting the request from Ukraine for a no-fly zone?
Thank you. And I just want to get back to the points that Kaja and Jens and all of us have made today. It is very, very important to understand that NATO is a defensive alliance. This is a time when miscalculation and misunderstanding is all too possible, and it's therefore crucial that we get that message over. That does not mean that we cannot help our friends, or it does not mean that they do not have a right to self-defense, and we can help them in that self-defense, and that is what we are doing. When it comes to a no-fly zone, which is I think what you asked, in the skies above Ukraine, we have to accept the reality that involves shooting down Russian planes. As I said in an answer to I think the first question, that's a very, very big step. It is simply not on the agenda of any NATO country. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. This concludes the press conference. Thank you for following.